The topic today, as most of you know, is are you really happy? And Buddhism is the answer. That's what we're going to talk about. So, how many new people do we have here today? You see your hands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Quite a few. Welcome. Of course, this is the English Dharma group, as Barbara mentioned. How many of you know a little bit about Buddhism, besides Jocelyn? Let me see your hands. Okay, and how many don't know anything about Buddhism? All right, good. So, we're going to talk about truth today and the pain we have in problem solving and how that affects our happiness. Are you all really happy? Let me see the hands of people that are happy. A couple of people that are tentative. Well, we're going to come back to that. The next 45 minutes, we're going to talk about what happiness really is, what the issues are that affect happiness. We're going to talk about the nature of Buddhism and how it works, particularly as it relates to our happiness and the happiness of other people. And we're going to explain how you can be happy, what steps you can take to help you find lasting happiness. And then we'll summarize and we'll have some questions. So this is a disclaimer. This talk is an overview. It's not an in-depth analysis of what Buddhism is all about. People have studied Buddhism for years and years. It's very complicated. But we're here today to talk about the basic concepts of Buddhism and how they can make your life better. Does anybody remember this guy? Who is this? Huh? Inspector Clouseau of the 12e Bureau. His real name is Peter Sellers. And he was in a famous, for you younger people, he was in the 1960s a comedy film series called The Pink Panther. And Peter Sellers, he had a famous movie scene where he walks into a hotel. He's checking in in the lobby with the guy at the desk. And he sees a dog lying in the center of the lobby. And he walks over, he looks down at the dog, and he turns back to the hotel guy and he says, "Does your dog bite?" And the hotel guy says, "No." So he reaches down and the dog bites him. And he says, "I thought you said your dog didn't bite." And the guy says, "It's not my dog." So you might be asking, well, what's the message here of that dog bite? What does it have to do with Buddhism? Well, what we just saw with Peter Sellers is a little bit of ignorance and delusion, which is really at the root of most of the problems we face in life. And that's what Buddhism helps us overcome. Now, Clouseau's assumption about the dog was basically reasonable, but it was painfully incorrect, and wrong. Okay? He assumed that it was the dog belonging to the guy, and it wasn't. The message for us is that things are not always as they appear. We kind of conjure things up in our minds the way we want things to be. And we project that on any given situation. This is fantasy. It's not reality and it's not truth. And Buddhism is about truth. So another example is the glass that's half filled with water? Is it half full or is it half empty? And this is how our minds look at things. It's the initial reaction when we see something. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it full? Is it half empty? Buddhism helps us focus on these concepts in our lives and then structure our thinking so that we avoid problems and pain. We'll come back to that later. So, are you really happy? What do we mean by happiness? Well, in the context of Buddhism, we mean content, satisfied, peaceful, serene, tranquil, and calm. Well, those are pretty lofty goals. Would you like to be calm and peaceful? Sure, it's nice. Can we do it all the time? It's difficult. But Buddhism can help you do that. Is sensory pleasure the same thing as happiness? How about a big ice cream sundae? Is that happiness?
I think for the kids, yes.
I think there's a phone call for you in the other room. Food and wine, is that real happiness or is that pleasure? It's pleasure. It's momentary pleasure. But sometimes we confuse pleasure with happiness. So we're constantly chasing after more pleasure. So if one ice cream sundae is good, what about 20 ice cream sundaes? Is that good? No. Pleasure is temporary. This is a very important concept that we need to focus on briefly. We use pleasure as distractions so that we can avoid making painful decisions, facing painful problems. And the fact of life is that it's full of problems. Life is about problem solving, right? We have to do it every day. But many times, we avoid those problems. Consciously, we avoid those problems. So we don't have to face them. We procrastinate, we pretend they're not there. And what happens? The problems build up, and all of a sudden they become so overwhelming that we're stressed out all the time. Is that happiness? No. Years ago, when I was in the real estate business, one of my clients was Exxon. And a lot of the people that I worked with had a frog on the desk, a big frog, a kind of a stuffed frog. And I said, well, what is that for? Because 4 or 5 people had it. And this was their way of reminding themselves that when you have a tough job in front of you, when you have to eat a frog, you need to do it right away. Make it the first priority. Get it out of the way. So that was kind of a reminder to do the tough things first. If you put the tough decisions off to the end, what happens? You partially enjoy the good stuff that you're doing, the easy decisions, but in the back of your mind you're thinking, oh, I got to do this big homework assignment, or got this big report done. But if you get it out of the way first, it's done. What other distractions do we have? Well, you can't travel around the United States or even in Asia. Amy and I just got back from 6 weeks in Asia, and you'd be amazed at how many people have smartphones. And we traveled most of the time on the trains. So everyone's sitting there on the train like this. 78% of Americans have social media accounts. 78%. Teenagers today spend up to 8 hours a day on their smartphones. that sound like they're paying attention to what's going on in their life? No, it's a distraction. And it's an easy thing to do. I'll just put here and text my friends, And so, how many here in the audience are happy all the time? Let me see your hands. That's not good. Judy, get their names. How about half the time? That's a little bit better. How about never? Never. Where's Jade? Jade? Where'd she go? Okay. So we're going to talk about how you can be happy all the time and how Buddhism is going to help us do that. Is happiness important in our lives? Yeah. I mean, if you make a list of things that are really important, happiness has got to be right up there at the top. You were hiding. I was looking for you. Make more noise. So are we really happy? No, not really. I mean, you just saw that, right? You just saw that evidence. Okay. How many think they're happy, but really they're not? Well, I was at a Buddhist retreat a couple of years ago in India, and we had a breakout session with people in my group, and a young Israeli girl, kind of early 20s, was sitting there saying, well, I don't know why we're doing this. I'm happy. And she looked happy. But I asked her if she had been angry in the past week. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, have you been jealous in the past month? And she said, well, yeah. And so the question, of course, is can you be angry and jealous and be happy at the same time? And of course, the answer is no. So what she was saying was that she's kind of happy part of the time, but not so happy other times. She's a little bit delusional. And our goal, we all do that, but our goal is to be happy all the time. Now, how many think it's impossible to be happy all the time? Let me be honest. Okay. Now, let me make sure I'm clear here. This doesn't mean that everything is going to be great all the time, because we're going to have problems. There are going to be challenges every day. But you can't change what happens to you. You can change how you react to it. Okay? So let's say somebody cuts you off in traffic. I think it's happened to all of us. How do we react to that? Do we reach over and pull out the .45? Is that a good idea? Probably not. But how do we react? Do we get really angry? Do we get red? 45? Air horn. All right. So we don't like it when people cut us off. But do we have to be angry about it? Because when we get angry about it, who is it that's really being hurt? It's us. Because that other idiot doesn't care, does he? Now, what is the chance in the next week that some crazy driver is going to cut you off? Would you say 10%? 50%? How about 100%? Yeah, it's going to happen. So if you're assuming that it's not going to happen, that everything's going to be wonderful, you're being delusional, because it's going to happen. Today we're going to look at what blocks complete happiness and how Buddhism can remove those barriers. So here's some common barriers to happiness: greed, desire, anger, hate, ignorance, delusion, jealousy, envy, fear, worry, anxiety, depression. Does anybody here know anybody who has had any of those problems? Yeah. I mean, the fact is, almost all of us, except Jade, have had these problems. All right. So these are common emotions, and sometimes when we have these problems, we get consumed with them, and we look for ways to ease the pain, sometimes with disastrous results. Anybody know who that is? Yeah. And sadly, he passed away. For people who don't know, that's Prince. He passed away a couple of weeks ago from a drug overdose. So Buddhism refers to these barriers as the three poisons. It's kind of a nice way of thinking about it. Three poisons. The first one is greed, desire, cravings. It's that I want. Okay? We all have that, except Jade. The second one is anger, hate, aversion, avoidance. That means I don't want. I want to stay away from that. I don't want to go to the dentist. I mean, we've all kind of been there, right? And the last one is ignorance and delusion, which is not understanding what's going on, not understanding how things work. And it leads to unrealistic expectations. So if you have unrealistic expectations and things don't turn out the way you thought they would, you're going to be, anybody? Unhappy, right? So this I want behavior, which we all have, it applies to money, cars, houses, clothes, power, status, you name it, food. Does anybody know who the Sultan of Brunei is? Sultan of Brunei. Brunei is a small country in the kind of that West-South Pacific area, near Malaysia and Borneo. The Sultan of Brunei is kind of the head guy there. He's got a lot of money from the oil in that country. He has 4,000 cars in his garage. 4,000 cars. But why do we want more of something? What's that all about? Well, we're not satisfied, we're not content, we're feeling separated from everything else. Separated from people, separated from organizations, we're isolated. And in Buddhism, we talk about duality versus non-duality. Has everyone heard that term before? So the concept here is, in duality, you have this big separation. It's me and everybody else. Well, is that healthy? No. Because guess what? We're all in this together. I mean, we have to face the same problems every day. So do we want to be in a constant competition with other people, or do we want to be helping other people? Okay. So we talked about pleasure. Happiness would be, for example, long-term planning and working for your family's well-being. That would be a form of happiness. It's long-lasting. Now, we talked about anger, not getting what we want, avoiding things we don't want. We also say that that's attachment, which means that we're so invested in that anger that we can't let go of it. And any of us who have had anger in our lives know that it's a whole lot easier and more enjoyable when you're able to let go of that. I was one of these road rage people. I didn't have an air horn. I wanted one. But I got really angry when people would do stupid things. But I don't anymore, because I know it's a part of life. It's not my problem, it's their problem. I ignore it. I anticipate it and I ignore it. And I'm happy. Anybody know these people? So I think we could probably go around the room and ask what your initial reaction is if I pointed to one person or the other, that one or that one. And you might have, I'm sure we're going to see anger and aversion for one or the other. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. Who said both? Get his name. Yeah, I mean, a good point. But the fact is that we have strong feelings about politicians who want to run our country. We have expectations of what they're going to do, whether it's good or bad. Are they honest? Are they crazy? Right? So we know what ignorance is. That's not knowing something. Delusion is a belief held with strong conviction, despite superior evidence to the contrary. Has anybody ever had that? You really believe strongly in something? Don't shake your head. I know you too well. Yeah. All of us have been deluded at one time or another. We have strong beliefs, and all of a sudden we find out, man, was I wrong about that? Where does that come from? Social programming. Now, what is social programming? Well, advertising is a good form of social programming. You remember the Marlboro Man? Everybody wanted to be that cowboy with the cigarette in his mouth. Some of you are too young to remember that. But advertising is pure social programming. It's getting you thinking about what you'd look like in that new car, or how good that bottle of beer is going to taste. Let's talk about reality, because that's really what we're dealing with here. Life is constantly full of problems. We have to accept that. It's going to be painful, but it's reality. So if we're thinking something different, we're fooling ourselves. We need to go directly confront these problems, because they're not going to go away. Don't avoid them. Don't procrastinate. Take care of them. Some people ignore this, and all that happens is the problems build up to the point where they're overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. It's not mentally healthy. Does anybody know this book, The Road Less Traveled? It was a great book. It was written maybe 20, 30 years ago. Anne, did you read it? Dr. Scott Peck, he's a psychiatrist, and it's worthwhile reading. He basically talks about how we avoid problem solving and how it makes us miserable. And he has 4 kind of rules for self-discipline. One is delayed gratification. Do the hard things first. Put the easy stuff off till later. How many of you wanted to watch television before you had to do your homework as kids? Yeah, we all did that. Okay, but is it a good idea? No. take personal responsibility for what's happening in your life. Don't blame others. Well, it's not my fault. It's their fault. These are kind of tough to do because we don't like to do this, but it has to be done. In the end, it's worth it. Be committed to total honesty. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with your friends, your family. Don't twist things around because it just makes everybody unhappy. And lastly, you have to have balance in your life. Don't take on more than you can handle. So we can be happy. Let's talk about Buddhism. Is it a religion? Is it a philosophy? Is it a way of life? Well, it really doesn't matter what we call it. But what Buddhism is all about, I think, is illustrated in this experience that Amy and I had on our trip. This is a temple in northeast China, a small town called Haicheng. It's called Dabei. And you can see it's under construction, but it's huge. And it's in the foothills. And so we were on a tour of that temple, and we met a young monk, and we started talking to him, and it turns out that he had a PhD in materials science. Materials science. And here he is now a Buddhist monk. And I thought the contrast was really striking because he went from studying the science of materials, of molecular structure and strength and melting points and all of that stuff, to Buddhism. And it struck me that Buddhism is really behavioral science. I mean, that's what it basically is. And so, for those of you who don't know, the Buddha was a young guy living in India, 29 years old, who was wrestling with the same problems in life that all of us wrestle with. Same problems. But he decided that he wanted to find answers. So he gave up everything. He had a comfortable life, he had a wife, he had a child. But he wanted to learn about life and death and sickness and aging and all of those things. So he went off for 6 years and he studied life's problems and human behavior. And he came up with a guidebook, a field guide or a GPS. How many of you have driven into a new city you know nothing about and you're totally lost? Now we have a GPS. Yeah, I mean, we've all done that. But now we have a GPS, and what does it do? It tells you you can turn left here, turn right there, and it's a guidebook. Has anybody been to Paris? Paris, or even Washington, D.C., the roads don't have any symmetry to them. They're all over the place. So you need a map. Those of you who have heard my talks before, you know that I like Albert Einstein. I think he probably was a Buddhist because he has so many great quotes. And this one is that it's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with the problems longer. And the Buddha stayed with this problem solving for 6 years. Think about that. He gave up everything and he thought about all this stuff and he figured it out. After his awakening, he spent the next 40 years teaching people what he figured out. And that's been passed on to us today. Think about the Buddha as a doctor. He saw the problems that we struggled with, and he prescribed certain procedures and steps to overcome that. So the effect of all of this is that we wake up our delusional minds And we recognize the truth in life and the importance of tackling big problems, getting them out of the way. And the result is the permanent removal of barriers. So how does this work? Well, there are 4 phases. So the first phase is your awareness. It's your awareness that you've got these problems and you want to get rid of them. I mean, recognition and acknowledgement is kind of the basis for all behavioral problems, right? It's classic psychological progress. The second one is learning the Dharma. Now, we're going to talk about what the Dharma is for those of you who don't know, but the Dharma is basically the teachings of the Buddha. It's not all of his teachings, which will take you a full lifetime to get through, but we're interested in the core concepts of what the Buddha taught, which we're going to talk about today, and how that impacts our life. The third phase is meditation. And the last part is daily practice. So what you're basically doing is you're learning his guidelines. When you meditate, you're thinking about all of this and how it relates to your life. And then every day, as you do things, you're consciously aware, you're mindful of, what am I doing? Is this consistent with these guidelines? Okay. So let's talk about the core concepts here, and then we're going to talk about the guidelines. It's just 2 simple areas. As I said, it's easy to get overwhelmed with a lot of this stuff, and then you say, oh, I can't do all of that. Core concepts. How many of you have heard of these impermanence, non-self, causality? Everybody pretty much familiar with this? Okay, because we're going to talk about each one of these and how it affects, my eraser doesn't work too well here. So we're going to talk about these and how they affect our lives. Who can tell me what impermanence is? Let me see. Do you see how I'm looking at Jade here? Jade's saying, don't call on me. What's impermanence? Yeah, speak up a little bit.
Everything is impermanent.
Yeah, everything is impermanent. What does that mean? What about you? Are you impermanent?
Of course. Nothing lasts forever.
Yeah, nothing lasts forever. But sometimes we forget that. How many have forgotten that? Because, yeah, we all do that. We think we're going to live forever. Okay, but it's not just us. How many of you have had, like my son, have had their car break down recently? Russell was driving from Norfolk, Virginia, down here to Houston because they're changing his naval base, and he's bringing a truck and a trailer, and before he gets out of Virginia, the transmission line on his cooling system for his truck breaks down, and it takes him 6 hours to fix it. Is that going to happen to all of us? Yeah, it's just part of life. Should we get angry about it? No. It's just going to happen. Okay. So we see here, I got somehow, I must have been pushing buttons here. All right, so we're back to the core concepts. So that's impermanence. So we need to be aware that nothing goes on forever and keep that in the front of your mind. Non-self. Now this is probably the most important concept in terms of our happiness. What does non-self mean? Why is this an important core concept?
Thinking globally.
Sorry?
Thinking globally.
Yeah. Who else has a concept here on what non-self means?
Everything is interconnected.
Everything's interconnected.
Everything is, somehow related to each other.
Could you live without anybody else in the world?
Not really.
No. How would you get vegetables? How would you get fuel for your car? I mean, we are not independent. But there's another aspect to this non-self. Who wants to be a volunteer, if I can pick on here, since I picked on Jade? So, my friend EJ, raise your hand, EJ. If I say, can I play a little game with you here? Say yes. So, who are you?
Today.
That's good. Who are you?
Name-wise or otherwise?
Yeah, there you go.
EJ.
Right off the bat, the first thing we say is, well, I'm EJ, or I'm Shamu. Okay? But that's not the question. The question is not what your name is, it's who are you? So Phyllis, who are you?
More than my name.
You see Phyllis struggling here? Yeah. Now, Phyllis worked for an oil company. And so she might say something like, well, I'm an oil and gas person. But that's asking them, well, what do you do? And that's not what the question is. Who are you? So Bob, who are you?
It's taking me so long.
Now, under 2 hours, who are you? Okay, so you guys see where I'm headed here, right? The fact is that who we are is constantly changing. Are you the same person, Judy, are you the same person you were 10 years ago? No. You're totally different. Lily, you're not going to escape, Are you the same person you were 3 months ago? No, because everything has changed in our life. You're not the same person you were 10 minutes ago before you came into this room. Before you came into this room, you were happy, and now I'm telling you about how unhappy you are. But the fact is that the self is not a permanent, unchanging entity. We are always changing. So, who are we? We're a collection of thoughts, and that's it. Has anybody heard of the Buddhist? I know some of you have heard of the 5 skandhas. Sometimes we call them the 5 aggregates. But basically, these are the 5 areas that influence who we are. So the first one is form or body, which is your senses and everything. The second one is your feeling. The third one is your perception. The fourth one is volition, and the fifth one is consciousness. So how does that work? Well, let's say that you had an ice cream cone. And you see an ice cream cone with your senses. That's the form part. The feeling you get when you see that ice cream cone is usually good. Most of us like ice cream. Okay. So the feeling is good. The perception is, oh, I could sure go for that ice cream cone right now. I think I really want that ice cream cone. That's the perception. The volition is your decision to get that ice cream cone. I'm going to go buy that ice cream cone right now. And the consciousness, the last one, is your mind remembering all of that stuff. So the next time you see an ice cream cone, you're going to have the same reaction. You're going to say, that's good. I think I want one. I'm going to go get one. Okay. That's how you, yourself, develops. Now, sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's bad. I mean, if you're some poor African kid who's part of one of these gangs over there in Nigeria, murdering everybody, you're going to be thinking bad stuff. That's how the skandhas work, okay? But the self is just a collection of thoughts. It's not permanent and real. Does that make any sense? Okay, we are ourselves, but when we ask what that really means, it's an ever-changing mental image. And it can be good, it can be bad, it can be happy, and it can be unhappy. Let's talk about causality and karma. Who wants to tell me what that is? Because this is equally as important in talking about non-self. Does anybody know what causality is? So karma basically is stimulus response. Okay? So it's the cause and effect. It's the action that you take or the thinking that you have and the effect it has on somebody else. So if you spit in Hulk Hogan's face, what's likely to happen? You're going to get hurt, right? Okay, that's a simple example. But our actions have a direct impact on our happiness. So if you walk into a room full of people and you smile, and you say, hey, is everybody happy today? Chances are you're going to get smiles in return. But if you walk in like this, what's going to happen? You're going to get the same reaction. This is simple stuff. But how many times do we forget that in our lives? So if we are conscious, mindful of these basic concepts in our lives, you're going to see happiness is not so far away. It's not that hard to find total lasting happiness. Okay, let's talk about, now we're going to save emptiness for another discussion because emptiness can be a little bit puzzling for some people. The basic idea behind emptiness is that nothing has intrinsic value. So if you take my son's truck, the only value it has is essentially utility. But how many people do you know that look at their cars as if it was one of their children, besides my son? I mean, they have great pride in their cars, but it's just basically a bunch of metal that gets you from point A to point B, right? So we imprint these personalities. And at the end of the day, if you want to get into physics, that car it's just a bunch of air. I don't want to get too far off into the weeds here, but if you look at molecular structure and atomic structure, there are huge gaps between electrons, for example. You can ask Doug about that. He's our resident expert. Let's talk about equanimity, maybe. Who can explain equanimity to me? It's an important concept, equanimity.
All things have equal value.
Yeah, but it has more to do with our personality. We are even tempered, for example.
So it's application that we apply equal thought or value or non-value.
Yeah, so let's do a little graphic here. And if this is even-minded, sometimes we can be manic about things. You know, how many people know sports fans that go crazy when their team is almost going to win, and then, yeah, they've won, and they go crazy, like Ann. Okay, so, wow, you know, they go way up here like this. But how many other people, when their team loses, oh, then they have a few drinks, right? How could this happen? My team! But who cares? Is it important to go through these wild swings? No. When you see the picture of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, is it important to have these wild reactions? I hate that person. I love that person. No. So equanimity is kind of being even-minded. So, you know, if good things happen, that's great. If bad things happen, well, it's life. But you don't have these wild swings of mood. Okay, we're going to speed this up a little bit because I'm getting close to my time limit. So, compassion, kindness, and interdependence. Compassion is one of the other strong core concepts in Buddhism, and that means you care about your fellow man. Okay? We're all in this room. Why are we in this room together? Why are you here, Jade? You're here to learn more about Buddhism, right? So we have a common interest in Buddhism because we think it's going to make our lives better. And if our lives are better, we can help other people make their lives better, right? That's compassion. You're caring for somebody else. Kindness is pretty easy. I mean, is anybody confused about what kindness is? I mean, if you want to help somebody across the street like me, older people, that's kindness. Giving up your seat on the train for somebody who may not be as physically strong as you are, that's kindness. You know, there are just all kinds of ways that you can be kind if you are aware of this and you make it one of your core concepts. Interdependence, as we said earlier, we're all in this together. We have somebody who's going to help us with our car. We're going to help them with their real estate. I mean, this is a give and take. And we're competitors to some extent, but we don't have to be cruel and mean about it, which unfortunately some people are. All right, now, the daily guidelines, besides the core concepts, they're long. And we're not going to go through them all because we don't have time today. But we're going to teach an introduction to Buddhism class for anybody who's interested that will explain these in detail. I'll tell you that the basic idea here is it gives us things, guidelines to think about. For example, the 5 precepts, that's about morality. So it means, for example, no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants. Now, I like alcohol. I enjoy a good single malt scotch. But I also realize that sometimes I have too many. And when that happens, my judgment is not as good as it used to be. Not to mention the fact that the next day, I feel like roadkill. I'm sure that's never happened to anybody else. So I stopped drinking. Now, is it a big deal? No, it's not. So the 5 precepts, including no intoxicants, which includes drugs, is not really a big deal. Not lying. It'd be nice if we could stop people lying, wouldn't it? Okay. I think, without going into the rest of these, I want to talk about 2 other things before we start to wrap up. One of them is called the 5 hindrances. Now, these are the barriers that keep us from breaking through these levels of happiness. The 5 hindrances are sensual or sensory desire, which we've talked about a little bit. Food, alcohol, new cars, sex, all of these things are sensory desires. Second one is ill will. And we've all had that. We've all had that negative reaction towards somebody for whatever reason. It doesn't matter. But we look at that person and we have ill will. Not good. The third one is, it's called sloth or torpor. Those are not words that we normally use in our vocabulary. Basically, it's laziness. We procrastinate. We put stuff off. That gets in the way of your spiritual development. So that's number 3. Number 4 is restlessness, which is the same thing as worry. We can't get this out of our minds. You know, I'm worried about the income tax or losing my job or whatever. And we keep rolling that around. That is a barrier to focusing on these issues. All of the issues we talked about, the 3 poisons. If we're worried about stuff, we can't focus on these issues, and therefore we can't improve it. The last one is skepticism, doubt, or uncertainty. I have this friend, he had a little trouble with uncertainty, making decisions. I said, "Do you have trouble making decisions?" And he said, "Well, yes and no." And all of us have had moments of uncertainty because we don't understand something. Well, what do you do about that? You find out the answers and you make a decision. You can't just vacillate all the time because you'll never get anything done. Now let's take a few more closing minutes here and talk about meditation. Because meditation is critical to what we're trying to achieve. Barbara, do we have a group coming in here right after this?
No, I wanted to mention to you it's summertime, so we do not have children's class meetings.
They're coming in today?
No, we do not have.
Oh, so we can stay till dinner here?
We
All right, so let's talk about why meditation is important. So, on this path to happiness, to nirvana, to enlightenment, we said you start out here with awareness. And then you learn the Dharma. And remember, the Dharma is just a guidebook. Just the Buddhist teachings, it's a guidebook. The third step is meditation. Now, why is this important? Most people think that meditation is just basically to calm your nerves. I want to be quiet and peaceful, right? I mean, isn't that kind of a common perception of meditation? We just, oh, I just feel so much calmer. Yeah, that's a very good point. And in fact, that's the first step in meditation. You've got to calm what we call the monkey mind. Anybody ever heard that term before? Yeah, because it's like the monkey in the cage that's jumping all over the place. Well, our minds do that. Mine certainly does. So, before you can focus on whatever the problem is, you got to calm the mind. And in Buddhism, you'll find that there are just literally hundreds of programs for meditation, but the one that we seem to like best focuses on breathing. If you focus on your breathing and you sit comfortably, and you don't have to sit in the lotus position. Some of you people can sit in the lotus position all day long and it doesn't bother you. If I get in the lotus position, I need to go to the hospital. So you can sit here on the bench and meditate. You don't have to sit like the Buddha with your hands like this. Okay, so you calm your mind, and then you start thinking about these issues. The Buddha's teaching. How does it relate to what I did today? Was I angry today? Did I say bad things to somebody? Did I try and shoot a driver because he cut me off? You kind of think about these things. It's what? Introspection. Can you tell my daughter is studying psychology? Yeah. It is contemplation. We are contemplating what's going on in our lives. So those two components are what meditation is all about. And you don't have to do it for hours. You don't even have to come to the temple to do it. You can do it sitting in your living room with quiet. You don't have any distractions. I find it's better to do it early in the morning, but you can do it whenever you want to. Anyway, meditation allows you to combine all of this so that your mind understands it. How many people play golf? Let me see the hands of somebody who plays golf. No golfers in here? Wow. Isn't that interesting? Well, I don't play golf either.
Analogy B.
But I can tell you that a lot of my friends play golf, and I mean, they spend hours how to address the ball. You got to get the knees right, and you got to hold the club just right, and your head's got to be just right like this, you know, and they're practicing swinging the elbows and all that. There's a lot to think about. Why are they doing that? Because they're trying to get it into their heads that this is the way you play golf. All right. Well, when you're meditating, you're getting all of this Dharma embedded in your thinking, so that your initial reaction when somebody cuts you off in traffic is not to reach for the 45 or hit the air horns, but to say, yep, there's another idiot. It's okay, no problem. I mean, you see a pothole in the road. Do you get mad at that pothole? No, you go around it, right? Well, that's what you do with bad drivers. Okay, so meditation. The next stage is practice. You got to practice all of this every day. You can't take a holiday. You can't say, today I think I'm going to kill somebody, but tomorrow I'll get back on my program. No, you can't do that. What is the result of all of this? The result is happiness, sometimes called enlightenment, sometimes called nirvana. And we can get into more detail on the various levels of enlightenment. It gets pretty complicated. We're not going to do it right now. This kind of concludes my talk. If you have questions, ask Jade. Anybody have any questions? I know you do. You've been sitting there thinking.
You have one?
Yeah.
When are you going to have the teaching?
The class? We're trying to set that up right now. So if you will leave your email address with somebody, we will get back to you with a schedule. But you got to understand this stuff really well, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. And if it doesn't make sense, you're not going to think about it, you're not going to practice it, and then what good is it? So leave your email and we'll get back to you.
The English Dharma Group website will, when that class is coming up, it'll be on the website.
Okay.
Also.
All right.
I have a question.
Yep.
So the meditation piece with introspection and whatnot, is that you're trying to do that without judgment so that you're not reacting to everything, you're responding?
Yes, that's a good point. It's without judgment. Now, but the fact is that there are triggers. So if something jumps into your mind, you might have a negative or a positive reaction. The point is you don't want to get carried away with that. You want to observe it, recognize it, make a note of it, and move on. And if it's a negative thing, if you ended up cursing somebody out on the highway, you make it a point to say to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to do that anymore. Now, it may not happen the next day, but over time, that's going to go away. You're not going to be as angry as you are. It's
Air horns for sale.
air horn for sale? I know someone who will buy it. My son probably will buy it.
They'll bequeath it to you.
Lily.
Okay, regarding meditation that you mentioned, it's kind of a little bit different from my perspective.
Yeah,
A little bit different from what we do here.
right. And what specifically is different for you?
Well, I thought that when we do meditation, we just focus on our breath.
Yeah,
And you have to kind of, just forget
yeah.
anything else.
All right, that's a very good point.
Meditation you mentioned is kind of like we have to do
Does it make
reflection or...
Yeah. Does it make sense to you in meditation, to ponder these issues? You know, we read a really good book here called 8 Mindful Steps to Happiness by a Buddhist monk named Henepola Gunaratana. 8 Mindful Steps to Happiness. And he spends quite a bit of time talking about the importance of insight meditation. So the first part is to calm your mind down. But the second part is to reprogram, to transform your thinking from negative to positive. And you do that through contemplation.
The other thing that breath offers is it helps redo your central nervous system. So that helps calm your body. Your physical body is able to calm down instead of just your mind. So you're doing both instead of taking some sort of medication to calm you down and then be able to contemplate without a whole bunch of reactivity.
Right. Good point.
You're calming yourself without.
Yeah, that oxygen really helps physiologically. What other questions? I'm a little hard of hearing, so.
Oh, okay. So I thought that in Buddhism we are learning to be enjoying now,
Yep.
this moment.
Mhm.
So isn't that contradicting with if we contemplating about the past or the future?
Now, so when you study more Buddhism, which you obviously have, you'll find that there's a lot of discussion about past lives and future lives and so forth. I try and stay away from that. My focus is bringing happiness in this life and right now. And so most of us need to rethink the way we see the world. We need to change our perceptions, get realistic expectations. And then our natural default reaction to anything that happens is going to have equanimity. We're not going to get really excited, and we're not going to get really upset or angry. And through that process, we're going to be calmer, peaceful, more tranquil, happier, and we're going to help other people do the same thing. Does that answer your question? Go ahead.
I think I probably understand what Lily and Lewan was trying to say.
Yeah.
You know, when you're meditating in the Buddhism world, kind of when you're putting yourself more, besides calmness, right? You're absorbing the concept of present moment. So when you're in the present moment, the thinking you were in the meditation is not your thinking at all. You're just enjoying your breathing and your calmness.
Yeah, okay.
But it's only, I think the confusion is only after your meditation. It strengthens your mind that in the next step that you get out of your meditation comfort level, you will start to face problems, right? But because your mind is strengthened, then you can slowly, using that strengthened mind, to reflect, all this unhappy thing, and then make you to think, backwards a little bit versus make the immediate reaction. Then it's like, if there's an moment, then I'm like, okay, now I know, I shouldn't be so nervous anymore, or I shouldn't be angry because of that. So it's really a tool for you to get to the next step.
Yeah, does everybody understand that? I think what's important here is not getting caught up in procedures per se. The more important thing is the result. And if you are calming your mind and if you are bringing all the teaching of the Dharma into your basic thought structure, you're going to change the way you think and you're going to be happier. Does that make sense?
Yes. Actually, what you guys was talking about was a big concern between the Buddhist meditation and the so-called meditation in our mind. So I'm a yoga person, so I understand that basically when we talk about yoga meditation, people talk about calming the mind, bringing awareness to the breathing, how your body feels so calm and relaxed, so balanced, your body, mind, everything relaxed. That's a basic understanding about meditation, and this brings us together. That's basic yogic concept of meditation. But the big difference between the Buddhist meditation and the regular meditation is, in the Buddhist we talk about
Eightfold path.
Manifold path, right? So the first one is right view, the righteous view, which is really important. Buddha is somebody who achieved enlightenment, meaning see the ultimate truth in the universe. So when he taught, he knows what is the ultimate truth. That helps you understand. So you have to learn from the Buddhism to understand what is the right and what's wrong. So when you meditate, if you basically think there and meditate, you just feel so good, you can easily get into the attachment to how good you feel, which is not Buddhist, which is just the regular meditation. So to get your mind and your behavior or your psychological habit into the righteous practice, you have to learn what is right. So when we talk about be now, be here, all the Zen teaching, this is somewhere somebody who already achieved a lot in the basic Buddhism. being called out by something. So that's why in Vipassana practice, the basic Buddhist meditation practice, we pay attention to the body, the perception of the body, the mind, and the Dharma. So you're contemplating on those. And that's really important when you're learning the Buddhist meditation practice. You have to learn the Dharma and the meditation all together. You cannot separate them. So if you only practice meditation, it can go really wrong. That's why we're here to learn Buddhism. So thank you so much, Amy, for doing that. I know we don't have actual